I'm going to go ahead and log into Procore, and I'm going to navigate. Here's my company level. I'm going to navigate to my Vortex project here. Let's go to RFIs, which you can have. You will see that your RFIs that are in your court are in your open items as well. So just something to note from that homepage. So before we go into creating an RFI, let's go into some basic navigation around the RFIs tool. So first off, you have just this list view here of all your RFIs organized by number. Anything that is in red is overdue, and anything without a number is a draft. So you can see here, I've also got status, and I've got some other fields I can view here as well. Something to note is that I can customize this view. So if you're working on a project and maybe it's more important for you to see the assignees up front, I can go ahead and click the assignees and drag them up here. Let's have the subject, the status, and the assignee. Maybe I want to bring up the RFI manager as well. So just keep in mind that you can do that. You can also turn off certain columns. So maybe if I'm not using subjobs, I could turn off the subjob column. So just keep that in mind as well. Again, everything in red is overdue, and then everything down here is draft. So we'll talk about a draft RFI and how to create them, and when you would create a draft RFI versus create an open RFI. As an RFI manager, so someone in the office typically, so your RFI manager is typically a project manager, project engineer even, or assistant project manager. I like to view this here as my queue, if you will. So these are the draft RFIs that still need to get out to the design team. And if I'm the RFI manager, I ideally don't want this to have too many RFIs in it. A couple of things to note too, in addition to customizing this view, you can also utilize some different filters. Keep in mind they're sticky, so if you leave Procore and you come back, you turn off your computer, turn it back on, any of these fields will still stick. So if I only wanted to see open RFIs, I could filter my list to see the open ones I've got here. If I have a lot of draft RFIs, I could maybe filter to only show the draft RFIs, that way I can focus on these, and just remember to clear when you're done. All right, let's take a look at some configuration settings. So we've got a couple options here with RFI manager. So unlike submittals where you have one submittal manager, in the RFIs settings, you're allowed to assign multiple RFI managers that are an admin. So if a standard user creates the draft RFI, any admin user can be selected with this configuration, or I can say that if any standard user creates an RFI, and then indicate who the RFI manager will be. So maybe you're working on a large project and you have multiple RFI managers, or some people are handling RFIs for structural issues and people are handling RFIs for finishes. You may want to use that first configuration setting. Default distribution is important because unlike submittals where you go through the close and distribute process, when I close an RFI, so if I open one up here, if I close this RFI, it's going to close the RFI and send to distribution. So it's going to send out to anybody on that distribution list. Now you can, of course, edit the distribution list on each individual RFI, but you want to make sure that this default distribution is set up. Allowing private RFIs and private RFIs by default are typically not used as much, but there are use cases where you may not want to show all the RFIs to maybe use your design team or owner, maybe collaborating in Procore's RFI tool. Maybe there are some internal RFIs you want to use, so you can utilize private RFIs if you'd like. I recommend setting this up too. New RFI questions will be due in X amount of days. Usually that's a contractual date, and it's just helpful to fill that out. Overdue emails for RFIs. I like to keep that one on, even though it bugs some people. And then we have a couple custom fields here. So there's two fields. The first one is a short field, and the second one is a long field. So that means is that the first field, I'll just put them both in here so you can see when we create the RFI what I mean by that. But these are custom fields that you can build into your RFI creation process. This one I really like a lot. Show only official responses to standard and read-only users. So if people are going on the drawings, or if they're viewing RFIs from the RFIs tool, that they'll only see the official response and the question. That way there's no chance of somebody getting misinformation from the RFI, and maybe there's a conversation, a dialogue going back and forth, and you don't want to show that entire RFI conversation because you want the answer or the required direction to be clear. In that case, you'd want to use this, this configuration setting. RFI numbering by stage is really useful if, in particular, if you were in a negotiated project that, maybe you have a long pre-construction phase, or you're involved in a project long after construction is over and you're involved in the warranty phase, because I can enable different prefixes for each stage of the process. So if I have a bidding stage, I can do bid. If I have course of construction, I could do con. And then, maybe during the warranty stage, I could do war one. That way I can separate the RFIs by stage, and I can also filter those out as well. So maybe if I have a ton of pre-bid RFIs, or if I have a ton of, pre-construction RFIs, I maybe don't want to have those on my log while I'm actually in the course of construction. So I can filter those out. So this can be useful for those type of projects. RFI emails, something to note that is not the same function as submittals. So on submittals emails, when we looked at this table, we talked about the fact that you could empty out this entire table and users will still get ball and court emails. That is not the case with RFI emails. So you may want to keep more settings here enabled. Typically, you're going to be paying attention mostly to the distribution group, because you want the RFI manager to get a notification every time something changes. You want the assignee to get a notification when it's, maybe some of these I may want to take off, like maybe an assignee doesn't need to know if, the draft was created, right? So I could take that one off, but most of these seem pretty necessary. Maybe the distribution group only needs to know when it's created and closed. Maybe they don't need to know about all of these different stages along the way. Maybe you have a client that just wants to know when it's open and closed and is not typically involved in the actual RFI process. So you may want to utilize something like this for those type of clients. But I would say most of the time I'm configuring this email table, it's in relation to the owner's preferences, because the design team does, for the most part, have to be involved as it relates to being an assignee on that distribution email. So let's go into the different ways to create an RFI. So I can go ahead and just create here from the web. This is the first way to do it and the simplest way to do it. I would just go through, fill out all my information here. Subject, assignees, RFI manager, who it was received from. So let's say I have an RFI that came from, my carpenter. So I'll say this came from Cody the carpenter, and it's going to be assigned to Amy the architect. We're not going to go through creating this RFI for now, because we're going to take one from draft all the way through. We're just going to show some of these different fields here first, just to get you familiar with them. Typically the ones that I'll fill out, you have to fill out the subject, you have to fill out the assignees. Distribution list, again, you'll have that by default set up, but you may want to add somebody to the distribution list on a specific RFI, which of course you can always edit later. You saw that when I populated the name here for my received from, that auto-populated the responsible contractor. I can fill in the drawing number, but we're going to show how to create drawings, RFIs from the drawings. And then I can add in the spec section, the RFI stage, the location, schedule impact, cost impact. Now, this, you can see here, I have that long field enabled, suggested action. So in the past, when I used to create RFIs from Procore, I would typically formulate my question and then put my suggested action or suggested resolution in bold, along with any reference fields. So that's how I used to write RFIs. It really comes down to personal preference. Sometimes people do like to use a specific field to capture what your suggested resolution is. So you can, of course, use this custom field for plenty of other things, but that's just the one I see most often. So when we show those custom fields in the settings before, I'll show those again really quickly. So that was right here in this gear icon. I have a label for that custom field 2, suggested action. And that's where that is right there. And this is a long field, as you can see, unlike one of these shorter fields right here. So I would go ahead and post my question and then create as open or draft. But we're going to create a draft from the drawings, which is typically our best practice. I would say I'd recommend creating an RFI in this fashion. So going through to the RFIs tool and creating a new RFI when maybe it relates to specs, or it's something that doesn't really have a place on the drawings. In other words, if it doesn't belong on the drawings, or if it wouldn't be tagged to a drawing, or if it's not useful to be seen on the drawings, then you may create it here. If not, the best practice would be to create from the drawings. So I'm going to open my drawings tool here, and we'll go ahead and jump into one of my drawings here. And so I'll show you first what it looks like when we create that draft RFI. I'll show you what it looks like at the end, and then we'll go through that process. So let's say I open up a dimension plan here, and I want to create an RFI on the floor finish in the break room, right? Break room 229. So what I was trying to do earlier was connect my iPad, but my iPad is not a host on the meeting, so I'm not able to connect it with the same account. So I'm just going to go ahead
Ryan,
and...
I think we might have fixed that.
Oh, great. Let me see.
You want to try?
Oh, great. Thank you for that. I'll stop my share here and I'll show how to do that. All right, great. So I'm going to share my screen here from Procore. Should pop up in just a second. Perfect. So now, if I open up Procore's mobile app, can you all still hear me? I kind of lost a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to open up my drawings here. I'll go to my architectural plans. Turn this over just to get a little more real estate. I'll go to my dimension plan right here. And I want to get in floor finish for the break room on 326. I'll go ahead and, or you know what, let's use something that requires a photo from the field. Why don't we ask about this window pocket detail over here? So we'll say this medium team area, maybe say there's some specialty shades that are going in there. Let's cloud this area here. So I just went to my markups there. So I'll delete that real quick, just show you all where it came from. My markups here on the side of the screen, I just chose the cloud. I dragged and dropped, and now I'm going to choose link. So before I go any further, what you're viewing right now is my superintendent's screen. This is my superintendent's laptop, or sorry, my superintendent's iPad. They're out in the field. This could be their phone. This could be a tablet, any mobile device while they're out in the field. So my superintendent goes in, notices the window pocket detail. You know, it's being framed up right now, and is pretty sure that we don't actually have a detail for that, as the carpenter pointed out to him. So I'm going to go ahead and say link in RFI, and I can hit with this orange plus button in the top right. That's going to create a new RFI. And so the intent of this is to create an RFI in as quick and easy and efficient manner as possible as someone who's in the field, because we know that you've got a million other things to do. But the value of creating the RFI as a draft in the field is that you can provide more context than folks in the office can. You can add a photo, you can add any information that you got from talking to the carpenter right next to you, right? So you can add in a lot more information that can come from the field rather than the office. So instead of emailing photos or texting photos, you can create the draft RFI here, should take a matter of minutes, and then send it off to the office. So I'm going to say window, pocket, detail. It's going to be in draft mode, which is important because you know that this RFI is not going to the design team. This is going to the RFI manager. So that's the intent behind this function, is that as a field staff member, you do not need to format this entire RFI from the field. I mean, anybody who's tried to do that, it's a nightmare trying to format an RFI and trying to bring in all the different attachments you need for your design teams from a mobile device. So the intent is that you can get the information in there, send it off to the RFI manager, and the RFI manager will clean up the formatting, add any additional attachments, things like that. So I'm just going to say, you know, please provide detail. So all I need to do is add the title, the question, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a photo. So I just added a photo there. I can go ahead and mark it up. I can add an arrow. I can add a text box if I need to. I'll hit save and done. So that's all the information I needed to include. I can also include a photo from my library or any files that are on my device. I can go ahead and select the RFI manager because remember earlier we had any admin user. And then you're welcome to fill out any of this information if you'd like, but you certainly don't have to. Maybe I'll just fill out the received from, remember this was Cody the Carpenter. And I'm going to click send for review. If you're an admin user, you will have the option to create this as open or as a draft. So if you're an admin user, you can send a new RFI from your mobile device. But if you're a standard level user, you'll see this. So most superintendents and assistant superintendents have standard access to the RFIs tool. So most of y'all will see a send for review button there after populating the question and the title and maybe adding a photo. So I clicked send for review there. And this will populate on the plans as a draft RFI. I gotta make sure I go in and publish this markup. And now that I've published this markup, this lives on the drawings. So that's the value of creating the RFI from the plans. One, if I'm doing it from the field, I can add in that photo, right? I can add some more context that can really only come from the field that I can't get from the office. And two, I've already posted the RFI. Throughout the life cycle of this RFI, it will live here on the drawings. I published it. So now anybody who comes to access the drawings in Procore, when they come to drawing A131, they will see this cloud and they will know that when they look at medium team area 315, that there's an RFI associated with that location. All right, and now let me show you where we're going. So we're gonna go through that process, but here's where we want to arrive at. This RFI number 3 is an example of one that was created as a draft and went through the entire RFI process. And now when I click on that, I can see all the information related to that RFI, and I see the official response right there. This is a case where my standard level user is only seeing the official response. They see the question, any attachments that were added, the official response, and any related information. So this is where we want to get to, and we'll go through that RFI to get there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen from my iPad, and I'll show where that draft RFI goes. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen from my desktop again. So this is the email that was just generated from my superintendent, who is using the iPad, to my project manager, who is the RFI manager. It says new draft RFI. Here's the question. And here's the attachment as well. And there's also the additional details down there. I can click into the attachment, take a look at the photo that my superintendent texted me or included in the draft. So it's much quicker and much more efficient, in my experience, to use this method, because then I don't need to go back and forth with text and emails of photos, right? The photo's already there. The photo will carry through the draft and through the attachments as I create and open the RFI. My superintendent has provided me with the context from the field that I need in order to format this and send it out. So as the RFI manager, I'm going to click View Online. And I'll be brought to the RFI page in Procore. Now, if I back out, you'll see that this is on my list here of in the queue. So I'll view that one. I'll go in and edit it. And so basically we're going to take the information that came from the draft and we're going to open it up, right? So window pocket detail, this is at conference 336, I think was the number. Let's get that right. We'll go to the third floor dimension plan there, make sure we have the right place. 315, that was. So at conference 315, I'm going to assign this to Amy, the architect. I'm going to say that the RFI manager is still me, came from Cody the carpenter, great. Maybe I fill out the RFI stage or spec section if I need. I'm going to leave those. I'm just going to fill out my cost impact and schedule impact as TBD. I won't provide a suggested action because I'm simply asking for a detail here. And I'll say, Amy, architect, please provide the window pocket detail at team room 315. Thank you, Brian PM. So I just cleaned up the formatting a little bit. I have the attachment that pulled through, and I can go ahead and save this as open. Now, when I save this as open, Amy, the architect, will get a notification saying that the ball is in her court, and she can reply to the RFI. So I'm going to open up now. This is Amy, the architect's view here. So what you're seeing, this is Amy, the architect's computer. And now as Amy, the architect, I'm going to go in and open up her email. So Amy, the architect, just got an email from me, the PM on the project, and this is what it looks like for that architect. Okay, new RFI. Here's the question. Please provide the window pocket detail. And that attachment has still carried through from the initial photo that the superintendent had attached when we created the draft RFI. Now, one thing that's nice about the RFIs, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is that with the RFIs tool, the assignee simply has to reply via email. They can reply in the tool if they'd like, or they can just reply to the email and it will populate in the RFIs tool. So they can say, Ryan PM, please see attached. Thank you, Amy. And she can go ahead and attach. We'll just pick some random file here just to show that the attachment comes through and send that email back. So now Amy, the architect, simply replied to the email, and now that will populate in the RFI in Procore. So I'm going to X out of Amy, the architect here. Sometimes it takes a couple minutes. We'll refresh it, see if it populated yet. Not yet. But maybe the architect's response will come through here. I think I just got a notification on my watch. That's another thing. If you're sporting an Apple Watch, you can get those notifications on your watch as well. So here's the response from Amy the architect that came in. Brian PM, please see attached. Thank you. And here is the file that she attached. I'll review that and I'll say, okay, I'll mark this response as official. And I'm going to close the RFI. Now, when I close the RFI, it went out to the distribution list, and I can see that this activity is memorialized down here. Now, I can click on this links here, and this will take me to the drawing that we created the RFI from. I'll open it up. And you can see down here what was once the draft RFI. When I click on RFI number 19, I see my question, I see the official response, and I have the attachment that my architect included for me. So that is the ideal best practice way to go through any RFIs that are created from a field condition. So you can just create them quickly as a superintendent, assistant superintendent, project engineer, what have you. Send them off to the RFI manager and then have it be cleaned up and sent out. Now, even if I'm a project manager or an assistant project manager, someone who's typically in the office more, if I'm walking the job site and I see something that I want to make sure I create a draft RFI for later, maybe I create a draft RFI for myself and then I go in and address it later and clean it up later. That's also another function that we've added to the web viewer as well. So in the past, you were not able to create those new RFIs via web. Now we can create draft RFIs. So if I hit this cloud here and I hit link, when I hit RFI, I used to only be able to link an existing. Now we support creating a new RFI from the web. So I can create this draft RFI with the same basic fields here, subject, question, RFI manager. And then when I create the draft, it will populate in the RFIs tool as well. So those are the three ways to create an RFI: one from the RFIs tool, two from mobile, and three from web on the drawings. Looks like I've got one in the Q&A. After initiating an RFI from a sheet, can you tag other sheets the RFI might affect? Yes, you can. That's a good question. So I can tag this RFI to as many sheets as I'd like. Unfortunately, I can't tag it in bulk per se, but if I did tag this, let's say I tagged the draft RFI there and I tagged it elsewhere on the plans, it would still follow that same, it would still have the same information. So retroactively, if you wanted to add it, let's say you wanted to add this to a reflected ceiling plan as well as the dimension plan, you certainly could, right? You go ahead and link an RFI, link to an existing RFI. I'll choose 19 and I'll have that RFI linked right there. So short answer is yes, you can apply it to multiple sheets, but it can be a little bit cumbersome, and although it is useful to do so. All right, now let's take a look at, and by the way, throw any additional questions in the Q&A. If there's anything that I said that you want me to touch on again, or they can all be submitted anonymously as well. So if you want to go ahead and just throw something in the Q&A that maybe didn't make sense, by all means, please do, and I'll be happy to touch on it. So we went through a pretty basic RFI. You know, we all know that.
Hey, Brian.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're sitting in the conference room, and I have one of our PMs that's got a question for you.
Sure.
Can you make custom notes columns like on the sheet on the page you're looking right now where you've got ball and court and all the things? Is there a way to make custom notes for, say, if you want to make notes for yourself about an item, like does this RFI need updated drawings? Does this RFI need to go to the CCD log or something like that?
Mhm.
Like,
no, I don't believe you can.
Dedicate notes to.
So the first thing I thought was maybe if we included that custom field that you might be able to configure that, but I don't think we're able to. So no, I don't think we do support that. I wonder if that is a feedback that we have, because that's a really good point. Something that, so you're probably talking about something that's like inline to editable, right? Where I could go in and say, add some notes next to an RFI from this view.
Yeah, I mean, several times, like, architects don't like to update their drawings until you get 10, 15 RFIs, and then they'll send out a giant ASI or whatever it is that they send out, so that it's a nice way to track, has this RFI been updated in the drawings or not? Mm-hmm. And other notes, I mean, there's always something that you can bring.
Yeah, that's not something that it's not something we support, but I'm trying to find the best way to manage that, because I think that's a really good point. That's something that you should have some way to address. So I'm going to see if anything comes to me. I know that there's, and I imagine you probably wouldn't want all of those comments to be public, right? You probably want those to be internal, most likely, right?
Correct. Yeah, just for your own personal use. If not, I'm going to make my own Excel side file, and that just seems counterproductive.
Yeah. So, yeah, short answer is no, we don't support it, but I'm trying to think of a way that we might be able to address that. So if I think of anything, I'll come back to it. If not, I'll do a little investigating after our call today to see if that's a common ask or if there's anything that we typically recommend as a workaround for that. Looks like I've got something else in the Q&A. When you link an RFI to a drawing and that sheet is updated, revised, do you have to relink the RFI? Great question. No, you do not. So any drawing markups will carry through to new revisions. So if I revise a drawing, all of the markups will remain in the same place on the next drawing. I did have an interesting issue once where I had a client who had a ton of markups on a drawing, and they revised the drawing, and the template shifted just a little bit, so all of the markups were in the wrong place, which was very unfortunate. But what we did to rectify it, and just if you ever do run into that issue, you can bulk select your markups. So I'll go ahead and select here. Maybe I'll do like a lasso to select everything here. I can move them all together. So if you do ever encounter that issue where you do have pages that were updated and not aligned properly, that's what I'd recommend doing, is just selecting the entire page via a lasso or multi-select, and then just moving it around accordingly. All right, I love the Q&A. Keep throwing them in there if there's anything else I could touch on.
We have another one here, Brian.
Hey, this is Kendrick, guys. This is more of a general. When you guys are asking questions on the RFIs, always make sure we're also providing an answer. Sometimes that's one or two options. So don't just ask the question and leave it at that. Do what we do, give them options. Usually you want to lead them to the answer that makes the most sense, and you guys in the field have a better answer than an architect does sitting in their office. So always give them the answer. And if it's a big RFI, you need to be engaged with the architects and pick up the phone and talk to them and get it resolved and kind of walk through that a little bit and then follow up on those RFIs. So always provide an answer with your question.
That's a great note too, as it relates to developing some standard operating procedures for your staff on site, right? So if you do have a complicated RFI, what's the best way for someone in the field to initiate the RFI, send it to the RFI manager, as quickly as possible. Maybe that's some combination of a draft RFI creation and a phone call that says, maybe the subject line is something basic, but the question says something to the effect of, here's the issue, recommend doing this. Follow up with a phone call to the RFI manager that says, hey, just sent in a draft RFI, take a look, here's the details, blah, blah, blah. If you didn't want to fill out the whole thing in the field, or if you didn't want to type out a detailed RFI in the field. To that point though, I do see a lot of people using talk to text, and that can be a really, really effective way to draft one of those long RFIs, those long draft RFIs as a field staff member, to just hit the talk to text button and just speak the question and send it off as a draft, because you don't have to worry about that going straight to the design team. Now, one thing I do want to ask in response to that question is, do you think that you would use a custom field like the one that we added there for this suggested action, or do you think you'd rather have it embedded in the question?
It can be a separate box as well.
So I think that the caveat to using this is that it's obviously not in the question. Maybe you put it in both places. Maybe it's just a simple copy and paste and you put it in the suggested action box. That way you can document the suggested resolution that you provided. That's maybe just a matter of preference. But yeah, because we do support formatting in these fields, what I used to do when I created RFIs in Procore to that point, when I added my suggested resolution, is I'd have my normal question in regular, and then I would just bold my expected or suggested resolution. If there's any more Q&A, just keep throwing them in the chat, and I'll go ahead and I'll show a little bit more complicated of an RFI, because we know that most RFIs are not that simple. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this one here. That is a duct light fixture conflict. So the question down below says, Amy the architect and Ernie the engineer, the housing for light fixture C3 is 4 inches too tall to fit beneath the ductwork running through the center of the conference room. We're aware that the ductwork cannot be relocated. We suggest the following solutions. Replace C3 with a thinner profile light fixture, or flatten the ductwork in this area. If I click a link to that drawing, you can see this is that markup. This is the one that we looked at on the iPad as well, RFI number 3. So you can see here, I have that ductwork running through the middle of the room, and I have a light fixture here as well. And in this case, I sent in the question with a few different attachments, and I have some activity down here. Now, the first thing you want to note here is that the assignees, I marked neither as required. The way that you configure who is going to be required a lot of times depends on the project dynamic. In this case, I have an RFI that is going out to my architect and my engineer, right? When I scroll down, my suggested resolutions to replace the light fixture or to flatten the duct, if we go with number 1, that direction comes from Amy the architect. If I go with number 2, this direction would come from the engineer, right? So in this instance, I'm going to mark neither as required, because I don't really know who is going to respond to the RFI or who I'm going to get my direction from. If I mark them both as required, Amy the architect might go ahead and say, hey, so replace it with this light fixture, and then Ernie's still marked as required even though he didn't need to reply. But maybe I have the engineer contracted as a consultant through the architect. In that case, maybe the final response needs to come from Amy the architect, and I mark Amy as required and Ernie as not required. So whether or not the assignee is required could depend on the dynamic of the contract. Who does the engineer work for? Is the engineer under the architect's umbrella? Are they both contracted independently from the owner? And it may relate to who's actually going to be providing the response. For simplicity's sake, you might say assign them both or not, neither. It's really not the end of the world, but you do want to just show some indication of whose responses you're requiring on this. So I had them both as not required because I didn't know who the final answer was going to come from. I have some reference fields here I filled in, and then you can see the dialogue from oldest to newest, showing where Ernie the engineer says we'd prefer not to make any changes to the ductwork. Please change the light fixture spec. The architect replies and says, the owner would like to retain this light fixture. Please see if it's possible to flatten the ductwork. And then Ernie the engineer finally says, it's okay to flatten the ductwork, just take a few extra readings during testing and balancing. So this is an example of where we want to highlight that official response. If I reopen this RFI, you can go down and see this is where I marked as official. I can mark multiple responses as official if it's necessary, but typically we want to limit the number of official responses. And then I can close that out when I'm ready. When I take a look at the responses export, I can export all responses, or I can export the official responses only. So this is all of the responses, what that PDF looks like. Here's what the official only looks like. So there's a couple different options you have there. You can also print out your RFI log to include all responses, or official only, or this regular one right here shows none of them. It's just a snapshot of the log. So you may want to utilize multiple official responses if you'd like, but for the most part, you'll probably only have one. And remember that setting where we went in to only show the official responses, that's something to consider as well. What do you want users to see when they open the RFI or they open the plans? I click on RFI number 9. Okay, I have the question, I have the official response. That's all that was necessary, right? So that's on official responses. So at this point, if there are any more questions, I do want to field those, and then I can go into some reporting options, and I can go into how to attach your RFI log to meeting minutes. As it relates.
I have one question here.
Is it possible to embed the drawings with locations? So like when you're going around doing your punch list or observations or whatever, the room has a location. Is that possible?
So you're saying that
Did you hear the question?
You're saying that like on the drawings, if I dropped a pin in shared office 130, that it would know that I'm in shared office 130 based on where I dropped the pin?
Yeah, judging by the eyes on my face, I feel like this is a possible thing, but I never figured it out.
So that's something that we get a lot in the quality and safety world. I don't have a timeline or know when they're working on it, but it's something that they are aware of and that frankly, my entire team loves the idea of, but something we don't support right now. So like if I did drop a pin, let's drop one there. Oh, this one is already created. It's not a good example. If I did drop a pin from mobile, then I'd be able to select the location, but it would not register based on where I dropped the pin. I hope one day we can.
So like, yeah, I guess are you guys working on like basically making a square saying as long as the pin gets dropped in this room, then it automatically populates that it's in room 120.
Yeah, I think there have been a few different ideas thrown around that, you know, whether or not we would have users, I think defining locations might be the name of that feedback request. Let me see. I think if I even type in locations, that might be, I'll have to look for that one, but there's one that's based around the same idea where you'd be able to identify locations or the pin would be able to identify when you drop it. Are there any other questions thus far? Do we want to go into some of those different topics, Miranda, around examples of reports that you could create on RFIs, or how you may want to attach them to your meeting minutes, seeing that now a lot of our meetings are virtual.
You can go ahead. I'm sorry, I was listening to.
So first thing I did want to touch on, just because I know a lot of us are meeting virtually today, the meetings tab here, if I want to attach my RFI log in the current state to a section of my meeting minutes, so let's say I go into my meeting here, and I'll create, I can do it from my agenda or from my, my meeting minutes actually, which is nice. I'll say this date is today, I'll bring it up to date, or I'll say it's May 13th, save that. So a lot of times people will ask, and a very common feedback request we get is to be able to attach your RFI logs and submittal logs to the meeting agenda printout. So when you distribute the agenda, to have the RFI log and submittal log attached to it. Right now we can't support that, but what we can do, if you go down to the appropriate field, so I'll go down to RFI log review in my RFIs and submittals section of my meeting minutes, or my meeting agenda, I should say, sorry. If I hit edit here, I can add an attachment to that item, that meeting item. So you can see here I have an RFI list in there. I'm probably going to be updating this attachment on a weekly cadence. And then maybe I'll go ahead and do one for submittals as well. But now when I export this, and when I distribute this agenda, people will get a PDF that looks like this, that shows the attendees, each section, and then you can see in the RFI log section, I have an attachment field. So that's going to have my RFI log that I've embedded in the meeting. So I did just want to show that. You may want to utilize that with any, even schedules or 2-week look aheads or anything of the sort, maybe submittal logs, procurement logs, things like that. And you may want to just click edit and add that attachment for that field. Now I'll show some reports around RFIs that you may find useful. So here I have one that is RFIs by status. And this one is just a simple report, just breaking down the RFIs I have, closed, draft, open. Some of the more creative ones I've gotten here, I have, let's see, I have an RFIs average time open. Let's see if this is any good. I've got plenty in here. So you can see here I have days open. I have an average that I've calculated, which I can edit here. So if you are creating custom reports, whether on the RFIs tool or on any other tool in general, know that you can add calculated columns if you'd like. You can pull in certain fields if you like. These ones are just pulled in from the side, but I can go ahead and add in any additional calculations or any subtotals as well. You can see here I have the average subtotal. So when I update this report, I can see that on average, my RFIs have been open for 32 days, which is not good. Let's see if I've got some other open ones in here. Is there any RFI report you'd like me to create from scratch that might be useful? I don't know how deep into reporting you wanted to go today.
Yes, if you wanted any RFI reports created from scratch. Unmute real quick. Yeah. Hey, Brian, we can't think of anything off the top of our head, but if we do, I'll send you a message and we can do that. I know they have some project spotlights that they have to go through still, so I just want to be conscious of time.
All right, well, that's all I had on RFIs then. Unless there are any other questions, I can certainly go into reporting if you'd like, but as far as the RFIs tool functioning in general, those are the main points and key takeaways. I would say, just to reiterate, I recommend getting in the habit of creating those draft RFIs from the field. I've personally been involved in projects where I was, quite frankly, just a little too lazy to get it set up or to, develop a standard operating procedure with my team. And as the RFI manager on my project, I was constantly getting texts, phone calls, emails with photos from my superintendents because we never went over a simpler way to do it. And after I finally started using the Create Draft RFI feature in Procore, it made my life a lot easier, and it made things a lot more smooth from the draft to completion process.
Great. Okay, if there's no more questions, we can, we'll move forward with our project spotlight. Really quick though, we will do some training on custom reports. It'll be a little closer to the middle to end of June. That'll be one of the last things that we do. Next week, daily logs, meetings and photos, and then the week after that will be Memorial Day. So we won't have a training that day. Brian, thank you so much for jumping in today. If there's any questions, I'll make sure that we forward those to you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. And then it looks like